Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. I am Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's weekly show, or at least my weekly show with the Western Standard, where I will speak to interesting guests, cover interesting issues, rant and rave, get stuff off my chest, and have exchanges with commenters. So thank you very much for joining us today, guys. We got a packed show, lots to cover and lots to talk about. I got a guest coming on in a little while. He's Professor Tom Flanagan. He's been strongly involved in conservative politics across Canada, federally and provincially for quite some time. And he's going to weigh in, and we'll talk about conservatism and the election in Alberta. I mean, Alberta is the bastion of conservatism in Canada, supposedly, yet here we are on the brink of possibly another NDP government. What the heck is going on? Is conservatism even saleable anymore? That is starting to get questionable. We'll see. I'm sure it is, but Mr. Flanagan is certainly going to add more to it. So I'm going to start off, though, with what's got me going today, and it's an issue, again, it comes up from the provincial election in Alberta, but it affects everybody across this country. And the story is the same across the entire country. Every province in Canada has greatly increased health spending in the last 5 years, yet every province in Canada is facing an overwhelmed, short-staffed healthcare system. People are dying while waiting for specialized treatment or diagnostics. Family doctors are nearly impossible to find. Ambulances and emergency services can't keep up with the demand, and hospital emergency rooms are constantly overwhelmed. It doesn't matter which party's in power. We got different parties in government all across the country. The issues are the same. So if money isn't the answer, and the party in power isn't the answer, then the problem obviously has to be with the system. Any politician questioning Canada's sacred healthcare system, though, is committing a form of blasphemy. Unions, pundits, and academics will pour from the woodworks and condemn the offender for daring to question the perfection of the Canadian system if they do. Eager legacy media outlets, of course, will jump into the mix and feed the fires with dire images of people suffering for lack of care in the United States. And they'll interview somebody from south of the border who's going to offer a sob story on how they lost their retirement and their home due to medical bills from an emergency hemorrhoid surgery or something like that. The politicians who set things off will then duck his or her head, and head for cover and won't bring the subject up again, and nothing changes. It has to stop. Canadians have to stop falling for the fear-mongering from the defenders of the status quo. Liberal and NDP politicians have accused conservatives of wanting to dismantle the universal healthcare system since it was created. Yet not once has a conservative government done anything to threaten the universality of the system. Well, many have had majority mandates where they could have done so at any time. I remember well with Ralph Klein, they were always saying he was going to privatize it all. It never happened. So if it's hollow fear-mongering from the left, so why do they do it? Well, it's because it works every bloody time. Canadians have been trained for decades to believe we have the best healthcare system on the planet, and the only alternative system is the American one. That's utter bunk. Canada's system is among one of the worst of universal health systems in the world when it comes for bang for the buck. I mean, there's great professionals within it, but the system's a mess. And there's dozens of other systems in the world besides the American one. We need to have frank discussions on the system and must look at models that are outperforming ours. There's many of them in Europe and Asia that are providing universal care while spending less than we do and without having to ration provision nearly as much as we do. So what's the catch, though? Well, they allow more private provision of care. Now remember, universal coverage. So, I mean, everybody gets covered. Nobody gets turned away. Nobody has to pay out of pocket. But it's not a monopoly any longer. Monopoly systems, they always screw the consumer. And in Canada, we're living under a healthcare provision monopoly. Lack of competition has stunted innovation, allowed a massive bloated bureaucracy to grow, and has empowered unions to the point where internal reforms are nearly impossible to achieve. The care is too centralized and hospital-centric, and they're bursting at the seams. But if you try to take services out of a hospital setting, you're going to raise the ire of the unions who rely quite well on those big union hospital environments. In Alberta, the NDP are raising the specter of privatized healthcare in the election. They're running commercials showing a person reaching into their wallet for a credit card while checking in a clinic. And this tactic is standard from the left, and it's unsurprising. What's infuriating, though, is that it works. Mistrust is being fostered in Premier Smith, and many people are saying things like, well, I don't like the NDP, but I can't let the UCP dismantle the healthcare system. How long are we going to allow the healthcare system to deteriorate before realizing and admitting it needs reform? How long will we let ourselves be fooled by the fear-mongering of unions that care nothing for patient outcomes and only about maintaining the status quo? Politicians need to find the courage to take on the system, and voters need to find the courage to allow them to do it. Until that happens, though, the system's going to continue its slide to the bottom no matter how many tax dollars are pumped into it. Well, that's kind of what's got me up and going today, guys. Well, lots of other stuff breaking and bursting in the news. Let's get in and check in with our news editor, Dave Naylor, in the newsroom and see what else is happening out there. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
All right, Cory. You know what? We're 3 days into it, and I'm already sick of the election. How about you?
It's getting tiresome and repetitive already, but we'll push through. I mean, this is like the Super Bowl for us in a lot of ways. It's just that it takes 28 days.
Beautiful day and colorful day across.
Okay, I think maybe we're having some technical difficulties with Dave there. Perhaps we'll check again with him in a second. Sorry, Dave, we kind of lost you there. You got me now?
Yeah, no problem, Cory. I think it's my my old computer about to give up the ghost. Why don't I just jump right in before it dies again? Well, lots of stuff on the website already this morning, Cory. Obviously, a lot of it election related. We've got a piece by our education specialist, John Hilton O'Brien, on what the fate of private schools will be under an NDP. Basically, it'll be the end of them because they've already said they will help eliminate private schools in the province. All COVID restrictions have been lifted in the United States. You do not have to have validation of COVID vaccines anymore to get in there. Interesting story coming out of Calgary Police this morning. They've arrested a Edmonton man, 69 years old, for a series of 3 sexual assaults in Calgary in 1984, 39 years ago, in fact. So an incredible development there. UCP, Jean and Rebecca Schultz had a press conference in Calgary about an hour ago, saying the NDP's promise of putting Alberta into a net emission zero plan for 2035 is going to cost $84 billion, according to 2 studies. And that would make it the most expensive political campaign promise in Alberta history. And our real estate expert, Mike Thomas, has a look at the real estate markets in the two key areas of Vancouver and Toronto. And the real estate there is purring along just fine. Rachel Notley just wrapped up a press conference in Edmonton. So our Arthur Green will be filing a story on that shortly. And lots more good stuff to come this afternoon, Cory.
Right on. Well, I can see I know you're busy as hell in there with this election going on and everything else, so I'll let you go back to it. Thanks for taking the time to check in with us, Dave.
Thanks, Cory.
That is the Western Standard News editor, Dave Naylor. And as you can see, they're working so hard, it's wearing down our internet access in the newsroom there. But be sure to check in on there, guys. The reason we have so many stories, we have reporters across the country, whether it's covering the Alberta election or all the rest of the issues going on out there, is because of subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed already, guys, get on there, westernstandard.news/membership. That's how we stay absolutely tax subsidy free, and that's how we stay accountable to you with our reporting, not to anybody else. So those who've already subscribed, thank you. If you haven't subscribed yet, come on, guys, get on there. $10 a month, well worth it. All right, so let's see, getting on to the federal scene. Let's get back, because I like to keep reminding people of this, because this keeps bubbling and going and bubbling and going, yet we don't seem to be getting any resolution, and that's the Chinese interference in Canadian politics, the latest revelation. You know, I mean, we keep seeing people on social media saying drip, 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 because you see that steady dripping of somebody is leaking from CSIS. These reports, all of this stuff where they've been raising alarm flags for years and years about how the Chinese Communist Party has been influencing Canadian politics. This latest one is quite a bombshell. Yet, of course, Trudeau dismissed it. That's not to be surprising. So, Conservative Member of Parliament Michael Chong, apparently CSIS had been tracking that the Chinese government had been making potential threats to his family who reside back in Hong Kong still, because Chong had been very critical of the Chinese government over here. Think of how huge, how scary, how brutal this is. A foreign nation intimidating our elected officials because they don't like the policy statements they took here. And it's not impossible, again, to think of China wanting to do that. Of course, that's the sort of thing China does. They aren't a nice country, or well, they're a nice country that their government is terrible. They're communists. So yeah, the Trudeau government was warned of this years ago. And what did they do about it? Nothing. Nothing. They didn't think it was important enough, I guess, to deal with. And that's essentially what Trudeau said. He said that he felt that CSIS just didn't feel this was a big enough issue to have to deal with. Meanwhile, Chong didn't even know about this going on. Now, there was a diplomat, Mr. Wei Zhao, who was involved in this. He was part of the one with the communications. He's the one that the CSIS had been tracking and watching, this diplomat from the Chinese Communist Party in Canada. Well, guess what? He's still approved by the Canadian government to work in Canada. He's still an active diplomat here. He's been working on interfering with our elected officials, threatening their families back in China. That's how that government works. It's not just that they can't control the people here. They control them through threatening their families. Many of them, if there's new Canadians or Canadians with Chinese family, they can threaten them from where they're back home, threatening phone calls, things like that. That's been documented as well. Yet nothing's getting done about it. Trudeau keeps kicking the can down the road, appointing his friendly uncle-like figures to be special rapporteurs. The Trudeau Foundation, more stuff is leaking about how they were taking Chinese money in. This corruption mess is getting worse and worse and worse, and nothing's getting done. Jagmeet Singh, of course, he holds the power to change it. Won't do a thing. One of the most cowardly leaders in Canadian history, that man. And you got to wonder, what the heck is it going to take? Meanwhile, it got heated in the House of Commons. Pierre Poilievre brought it up, wanted to speak about it, wanted an emergency debate. And he got threatened from the House Speaker, who threatened to eject him from the House for persisting on it because he shut down the debate. The Speaker who's supposed to be impartial, but the Speaker is a Liberal member of Parliament. Thus, they won't discuss it any further. I just got to wonder, how many more leaks is it going to take? How bad is it going to have to get? It sounds like they've interfered with multiple elections of ours now. And then they've got that other story, down in the States, there's Chinese police stations that were set up. We had them in Canada too. And Canada's prime minister of lies. And every show I talk about Marco Mendicino and his lies, because he lies about everything. The guy, I swear, he's pathological. He lied and said there were none of those police stations operating in Canada. Well, it turns out, yes, they are. Yes, they are. And, these were, they call them police stations. Basically, they're little toeholds of the Chinese Communist Party within our country that are here expressly for the purpose of influencing Canadian policy. Should we not be concerned about this? Yes, but this issue just seems to be dragging out. The strategy on the part of the Prime Minister to just keep kicking down the can down the road is working. And I don't know what it's going to take to hold him to account. I really don't. You can see why people give up on politics sometimes. It just feels futile sometimes. I don't know. We'll see what the release for next week is going to be when that one comes out. Speaking of just some other fun idiocy in the world of the woke and many other things, Bud Light, yes, they still make the news now and then. Their sales dropped 21% in the past few weeks. 21%! After their collaboration with a transgender activist, Dylan Mulvaney. And again, I don't care. The company wants to, go with social media influencers and different types. Good for them. That's your business. It's your company. But I'm just astounded when it comes to this because, know your market, guys. These are guys at rodeos. These are guys, in country bars. That's your main market. If you wanted to change your market and ease into it, fine, do so. But do it carefully. Don't jump right in with this. Boy, are you ever taking a spank over this pointlessly and without need. I don't know, but it all comes down to that ESG trend and almost fanaticism on the part of corporations. I guess recently Coca-Cola had their own shareholders stand up and tell them to cut it out because they were getting pushed to take a stance and boycotting states that aren't providing ready enough services for abortion. Let the corporations be corporations. It doesn't matter what side of the issue you're on. Quit this ESG garbage. Their role is to make money for their shareholders. They shouldn't apologize for that. And they got to quit dipping their toes into the water of social justice activism because as the saying goes, go woke, go broke. So yes, a 21% sales drop in one of the largest beer brands on the planet. That's nothing to sneeze at, and it's going to take them a lot of work to get that market back. All right, let's get into some more domestic politics and talk to our guest, Professor Tom Flanagan, and talk conservatism, politics, elections, and all that good stuff. We'll bring him in and see how it's going. Hello, how you doing?
Hi, Cory.
I appreciate you coming on to talk to us today. We got this election going. It's going to be clearly already a heated and a ugly one in a lot of ways. But what I kind of want to start with is, it's so close. It's neck and neck. Well, there's no conservative split for the parties right now. There's it's not even a liberal party on the other side that you could say is ostensibly centrist. It's NDP. Alberta's supposed to be the bastion of conservatism. What happened?
Well, the main thing that's happened over the long term is the collapse of the Liberals and the migration of their support to the NDP. The perception of Alberta as an overwhelmingly conservative province was always a bit misleading. It was based on the vote splitting on the left. If you went back and looked at the voting results for all the years that the Conservatives were in power, it was only a couple of times that they got more than 50% of the vote. Usually their vote was strong, but not actually a majority. There was always a lot of voters that were looking for an alternative to the Conservatives. Well, now they have one. And so our politics now looks pretty much like that of the other Western provinces, in which you have on one side a Conservative party with, in each province it's a different name and a different history. And then on the left, you have the NDP. And so our politics now is very much like that of British Columbia or Saskatchewan or Manitoba. And so, as I say, the perception that Alberta was different was a bit misleading. It was based on the split between the Liberals and the NDP, which has disappeared.
Okay, so what can be done about it? We see the UCP, for example, though, is definitely trying to recapture, I guess, some of that center-right or softer conservative vote. I mean, it's a very high-spending campaign they're going on so far, and they're certainly backing away quite often or trying to avoid what would be considered old meat and potatoes conservative issues. Do you think they're going to be able to pull that vote back to them by the time the election day comes?
Well, they have to try. Here's a situation for the UCP. 4 years ago under Jason Kenney, they did win an overwhelming victory, and they did get more than a majority of popular votes. But then they had the internal splits within the party. Jason resigned, and new leader Danielle Smith, who's got into power mainly on the strength of you might call them the further right elements of the party. Sort of a populist rural version of conservatism. These were her main supporters. So now to hope to win the election, they have to soften that image and perceive more to what in political science we call the median voter, people who are kind of in the center of the distribution. There simply is not enough support for the populist right, even in Alberta, to win the election. They could win control of the UCP, but to win a general election, they're going to have to appeal more to the median voter. So that's what Danielle has been attempting to do. She has downplayed some of the edgier positions that she took, like her Sovereignty Act was watered down, and she's opening up the purse strings, funding new arena in Calgary, promises for improvement of the healthcare system. All the stuff costs money, and it's designed to appeal to the median voter who could be swayed to vote in either direction. They're not firm supporters of the UCP, so they have to have inducement. So anyway, that's the strategy behind what she's doing, and it's a tried and true strategy of campaigning in Canada as in other countries. And what she's doing is pretty standard.
Yeah, so I guess some of the element of fear of the unknown with the NDP is gone as well. Alberta had never had an NDP government. It was always assumed it would be far, far left if they ever got their hands on things. And I believe, they certainly were a left-wing party when they were governing for 4 years, but they weren't as extreme as some might have feared they'd be. So it's not, people won't feel it's the end of the world if they got in again. So that's where they become, I guess, more into consideration for a common voter than they used to be 10 years ago when they were kind of a mystery.
Yeah, well, elections are largely determined by fear and loathing, as great journalist put it. I think the UCP should actually be doing more to stoke that. I think their best line of attack against Rachel Notley would be, and they are doing this to some extent, and I think they probably need to do more of it, to highlight her association with Justin Trudeau. And you could even throw in the leader of the federal NDP for keeps, for a bonus. Put a picture of the three of them together, and maybe have to manufacture the picture, and say, are these the people you want running Alberta? Because Trudeau is very unpopular here, and the federal Tories have no trouble sweeping the province. So I would say you want to associate Rachel Notley in the popular mind with Justin Trudeau, and point to episodes in the past where the two of them were on the same page. For their part, what the NDP is doing, I think this is a very effective attack ad. I've seen it now on big posters, and it's actually quite unusual in Alberta to have a big street poster with an attack ad on it. It's a picture of Danielle, and it just says, "What will she do next?" And that plays to her history of a very colorful political history of having been in different situations at different times: Calgary School Board, Wild Rose Party, attempt to merge. And then as a media commentator, what will she do next? As a media commentator, of course, she said all kinds of controversial things. You'd understand that, Cory. You're a media commentator. You're trying to provoke debate, but you're not running for office. Well, it's hard to move from what she has done as a media commentator to running for office, because now you have all this stuff that you said, and it's all online. So anyway, the NDP is their fear and loathing is with this line of attack. So that's part of the election. Negative advertising is an essential part of campaigns. Some people say they don't like it, but it's an essential way of bringing out facts.
Well, yeah, and I mean, people complain about it, but if any area of marketing has been more studied and checked and tested before its political campaigns, the reason it's done is because it works. And whether you like it or not, you can't pretend to play a high road and stay out of it, or you'll get the floor mopped with you from the other team. It's an unfortunate trend, but it's a reality in politics today.
Yeah, I managed campaigns for different leaders, and different leaders when they were new in the job. And without exception, leaders, when they're new, say, well, no, I'm going to take the high road, no negative advertising. Well, they paid a price for it. Particularly, I remember in 2004, the Conservatives got creamed by the Liberals with a barrage of negative ads. Well, in 2006, we were ready for them, and we had our own barrage of negative ads. You have to balance the ledger. So I think Danielle has learned that lesson, should have learned that lesson from the past. So we'll see if she's ready to respond in kind to what the NDP are attempting to do to her. So that's a big feat. It's an interesting campaign. Both women, which is hard. Nobody even comments on that anymore. It's become so accepted that women have leading roles in politics. But I think they're going to have to use these, and they are already starting to use these older techniques of campaigning.
Well, and you mentioned that it's both women, and one of the things that sort of went really poorly for Premier Prentice during his election when he lost to the NDP was during the debates, and it really was an impression of bullying. It was the taller man standing up, talking down to a more a shorter woman, and that imagery really soured a lot of people. Premier Smith isn't going to be accused of misogyny or bullying if she jumps into the mix on the more negative front, like a male leader would, in a sense.
That's a good point, Cory. Yeah, she doesn't have to worry about that. So I say let them go at it. I think it's important. It is very close. The biggest advantage that the UCP has is the fact that they get more bang for the buck for their votes, in that the rural ridings in Alberta have smaller populations. So, or in other words, they elect a few more members than they would if the constituency boundaries were strictly proportional. So that's the advantage that the UCP has. Whether it's enough to carry them over the finish line, I don't know. They will probably lose. They'll be lucky to elect 2 or 3 or 4 members in Edmonton. They'll sweep the countryside except for urban pockets like Lethbridge. Calgary is, contested, and both parties will win seats in Calgary, I think. But just a case of, do you get quite enough to get you over that 50% plus one number of seats? Every seat counts, I mean, so this battle has to be waged everywhere. Even if the UCP isn't strong in Edmonton, the 2 or 3 seats they could win there might be the margin of victory. So both parties have to contest everywhere.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, you get the donut around Edmonton, which are there's actually some strong UCP support there, but it's swing. And if you neglect Edmonton too much, I imagine that could hang over and you could lose some of those marginal seats on the edge.
Absolutely,
even if interior Edmonton looks like a lost cause.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, a lot of it's laying on trust, and they're really bringing that to a head with Premier Smith, the NDP, against her, and saying you can't trust her. You don't know what she's going to do. I mean, Danielle Smith has always been prone to impulsiveness. She is more of an idealist than a pragmatist, I think, when it comes to a lot of things. I think she's learning about that quickly now.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said on my show, if I were to run, and I know better, that's not going to happen. Of course, the opponents are going to dig out all sorts of quotes and things, and they'll pull them out and let them out slowly all the way through the campaign. We know that's going to happen and continue to happen with Premier Smith. Is there any way, though, she can head that off, or is she got to keep suffering this death of 1,000 cuts every day?
The best defense is a strong offense. If you're playing defense, you've already lost. So that's why I say that the UCP should have its own strong negative campaign against Rachel Notley. Don't bother trying to explain away things that Danielle may have said in the past. I mean, she's already dealt with that. For example, on healthcare, she said there won't be any fee-for-service healthcare. There's other ways you can point things that she has done. That's enough. Now you go on the attack and make it all about Rachel Notley's ties to the federal politicians who want to destroy Alberta's economy. That's the best defense.
So one other thing before I finish up with you is something kind of different around this time. I mean, there's always been some hot spots, but the rift between kind of both parties and the media in this election and trying to control their messaging going out. In the case of Rachel Notley, there's just certain outlets, including ours, that she just won't even talk to whatsoever. They won't even send us press releases. And Premier Smith won't take follow-up questions at conferences and is trying at least to reduce the amount of messaging going out when she goes into those. I mean, normally politicians are beating your door down at election time to try and talk to the media as much as possible. Right now, they just seem to be kind of almost trying to avoid it.
Yeah, this is, again, unfortunate, but I guess an inevitable trend of the polarization of media. At one time, there were fewer media outlets, and they had some pretense of objectivity and neutrality in politics. Today, that pretense is largely gone, and all the media are identified with one side or another, and politicians inevitably then take side. This is not a new development. For example, when I was working for Stephen Harper, he made strong attempts to speak to local community newspapers in preference for wasting his time with the Toronto Star, for example. Joe Biden, he's very selective in the questions that he will take. It's just a fact of life. So we have to get used to that. And I know it'd be frustrating for an outlet like Western Standard if the NDP won't talk to you. So go and talk to the other side and let them speak.
Well, and that's what happens. And I mean, certainly we're an unapologetically conservative editorial slant here, but you're only making us crabbier, and we're not going to get any nicer for your having shut us out. But that's the way
it is unfortunate. It's kind of unhealthy. But that seems to be the way it is, and it's not just here in Alberta. It's the way it is everywhere. So I guess we just have to live with it. So, we used to think there'd be a neutral media that would let both sides speak. Well, both sides are still speaking, but now they're speaking through their own outlets. NDP has Press Progress and other House organs that they can speak through. Western Standard is a conservative voice. I guess it's not the ideal, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, well, I guess I hope that some outlets on each side manage to hit the middle somewhere and inform the voters. That's all we can hope for. All right, well, that went fast, but there was just a lot to cover. I really appreciate you coming on to talk to us today, Professor Flanagan. It's going to be an interesting few weeks to see how this develops. I mean, it's close races in Alberta are actually something that have only come about in the last 10 years or so. And
well, because of I have to go back to the big structural factor that is determining everything else is the collapse of the provincial Liberals, migration of their support to the NDP, the emergence of a two-party system in Alberta, a true two-party system in which you have two large parties contesting for government. These are all relatively new developments in our history. We never had them from 1905 up until, as you say, the last 10 years. Yeah. So a lot of our sort of conventional wisdom about politics is outdated. It goes back to an earlier era. But now we have a different configuration, which seems likely to last into the future. I don't see any sign of small parties reviving. Provincial Liberals are dead. The Alberta Party seems to be dead. The Greens never got anywhere in Alberta. The further right parties have been wiped out by the further right takeover of the UCP. Then that took the wind out of the sails of the provincial Wild Rose Party. So all these small parties are non-entities now. So it's just the big two going at it. And it's different for people with memories. That's quite different than Alberta politics used to be. But I think it's going to be the way it will be for the future.
Yeah, well, we'll watch them punch it out for the next few weeks and see what happens. So thank you again. I hope we can check in with you again, perhaps before the end of the election or right after it.
Okay, vote early, vote often. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. So again, that was, yes, Professor Tom Flanagan, who has been very involved in politics in Canada for quite some time and has pointing out some very good points. And that change, that true evolution into a two-party system, I think it goes in cycles to a degree, though, right? Like when we look at Saskatchewan, a news story that came up recently, the Sask United Party. Saskatchewan kind of went to a point where they had a few things going on. They used to have progressive conservatives, and Grant Devine sort of blew that up. If people remember that old term for it, to err is human, but to truly F up is divine. And he really did do it. He basically annihilated the progressive conservatives in Saskatchewan. It led to a long period of time with the NDP in power with Romano, and they had a Liberal Party on the scene as well and things, and the Liberal Party in Saskatchewan sort of seems to have gone to the wayside, and it turned into a bit of a two-party system. But now you've got this Sask United Party coming from the right, and is this going to be a repeat of Alberta, though? Is there going to be a risk of Saskatchewan putting a NDP government back in power because the right's splitting? And when you think of it in Alberta, yeah, we had the NDP and the Liberals splitting things on the left. Now look at the federal scene. That gets a little more concerning altogether because we still do have a number of parties up there. But as far as the House goes, they're only splitting things on the left. You've got the NDP and the Liberals. And yes, they've formed an agreement, not a formal coalition, but something of a coalition. And they're maintaining power based on that. But how do you break that? That means if the NDP and the Liberals are one of the two collapses, or if the two ever formally merged, they would become even more powerful and intractable. Like in a two-party system, if it really was just conservative, just Liberal in Ottawa, I think we'd have Liberal governments forever. Perish the thought. That's part of why I do think, I look along the lines of sovereignty and independence and provincial autonomy, so we can adapt to those regional differences, because changing things within the current system is going to be exceedingly difficult. But we'll see what happens. And this is some of the things, with Canada's regional imbalance. Let's talk politics. Let's stick with it. So there's a language bill the government just changed. This is concerning. These are the other things we're not hearing about. Nothing's changing. This is one of the areas where Pierre Poilievre tends to be silent. Again, because you have to cater to the central Canadian voter. So this bill is going to give equality of status and use of English and French in Canadian society, a nice laudable goal, of course. But what this will do is expand bilingual requirements into the private sector. Now, this is federally regulated industries in the private sector, but that's a lot of them. Interprovincial trucking, a lot of it's in transport, airlines, things such as that. These are private companies, but because they come under strong federal regulation, suddenly they're going to say, you need to have a degree of bilingual ability and provision, even if you have no need for it. See, that's the thing. There's no need. Let's quit pretending Canada is bilingual. We are not. We've never been. Quebec is pretty bilingual. Parts of New Brunswick are pretty bilingual when we're talking French English. Aside from that, the country's English, guys. We got a lot of areas with a lot of people speaking English as a second language, but usually the first language isn't French. And I mean, Alberta, I don't know where French lands as far as first languages go. And I mean, in Northern Alberta, there's some areas, with a strong French population, and every province has some of that going on, but Hindi is more spoken than French. Cantonese is more spoken than French. Yet here we have this government that's going to force a degree of bilingual requirements into the private sector. Think of the advantage economically that gives to Quebec, that as if they haven't already had enough legislated advantage in Canada, as if they hadn't already dominated the senior positions in the public sector. Now we're going to be forced to have a degree of them in the private sector. And people say, well, English people could just learn French. Yeah, they could. But, realistically, again, getting around to who's really bilingual or not, go to Quebec. Most of the population of Quebec can speak a degree of English, even though they'll often pretend not to. Go anywhere outside of there in parts of New Brunswick, and people don't speak French. So yes, there's a distinct advantage being given over to them yet again. Our system is so imbalanced and in nuanced ways. See, these are ways that people don't think about with that. But it gives them a heck of an advantage. Getting back to, this is something else too. The CRTC, they said they're going to define newsroom ethics. This is concerning. Under a cabinet bill on internet revenue sharing. This is executive director of broadcast policies. Said he's met with newspapers and puts the onus on them to define newsroom ethics. I don't trust this government to define newsroom ethics. Governments need to stay the heck out of newsrooms, period. Particularly the bloody CBC. Speaking of the CBC, the state broadcaster, they hate it when I use that term for it, but I mean, as they become so increasingly a true liberal trumpet, you can't deny they're a state broadcaster. They do what they're told. Come on. I mean, again, Rosie Barton, I mean, you can almost see her quiver a little when she mentions Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's name. And that's the head of the political news desk up there in Toronto for the CBC. And speaking of that, getting back to our Minister of Lies, Mendicino, he talked about that. And he said the CBC is a pillar of democracy. That's interesting. Mendicino, again, the minister who specializes in baloney, the minister who is the king of BS and lies, has said the CBC is a pillar of democracy. How is it a pillar of democracy? When every Canadian is forced to kick money into it. Forced. You have no choice. See, I don't care. I don't care if there's a million outlets in Canada, individual ones, and I don't care how far one way left or right they might have a leaning. Doesn't matter to me. Just don't make me pay for it. I'll choose whether or not I want to view it. But with the CBC, I've got no choice. I have to pay for that. Every Canadian has to pay for it, whether you watch it or you don't watch it. And come on, they barely made anything decent since the Kids in the Hall and the Beachcombers. But he says they're a pillar of democracy. How is it democracy when you don't have a choice? That's liberal logic. And that's the sort of thing, again, with Mendicino, who, again, is incapable of telling the truth with anything. So let's talk about newsroom ethics. Because the CBC, this pillar of democracy, in the last year had to publish 36 corrections. 36 corrections. 36 times they put out articles that were wrong or untrue, and they had to go back and correct their own record. 1.4 billion tax dollars a year, plus hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from the private market with advertising revenue. And they still can't check their own news items well enough to avoid having 36 corrections a year on it. Comrade Jake, one of our commenters, saying, make CBC user pay. Yeah, I'm all with it. Have a national one. Let them raise their money through subscriptions or let them raise it through fundraising. Hold telethons. I don't care. Just don't make me pay for it. We don't need it. We don't need it. What is the need anymore for a state broadcaster? I mean, they were formed in the days when you had to get to some isolated parts of the country for communications with radio stations or television. Now, thanks to Elon Musk, you can get a internet access anywhere on the planet with Starlink. And just with other satellite dishes, if you're just looking for television, you can get that anywhere in a relatively affordable way. When I was working up in Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk 15 years ago, every house up there already had satellite dishes on their roof. They had full access to broadcast and television, and they had cell coverage. They didn't need the CBC. But we still have it. So why is the government so dedicated to hanging on to this dinosaur, this expensive piece of media, this obsolete piece of media that we don't need any longer? Well, it's because that's the piece of media that never questions them. Remember, again, I'm talking about we've got a massive, massive Chinese election interference scandal. We've got Chinese Communist Party operatives threatening our members of parliament. And you know what you hear out of the CBC? Crickets, dead silence. It's an embarrassment. And it's an expensive embarrassment. But I mean, hey, if the Liberal government doesn't have the CBC running cover for them, then maybe private markets will get in there and start asking questions they don't want to answer. Thus, you can see why their love affair for the CBC continues. And it's maddening. Okay, I'm going to talk about another one now, an issue. I just got to get into this one. I know this gets the commenters going with me, and they don't always agree, but I still see this is where you get polarized politics, and I don't like how it gets played sometimes. So Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and I like DeSantis, don't get me wrong here, but he signed a bill into law on Tuesday that would allow the death penalty, and I like the terminology in this one, for cases of child rape. I'm tired of people, talking about it, sexual interference and talking in circles or things like that, or even the most vulgar and disgusting of people you see out there. Were some activists calling them minor attracted people. No, they're child rapists. They're pederasts. They're pedophiles. Don't sugarcoat who those people are. I have no use for them, but I also have no use for capital punishment. That's where we depart. That's where we have a problem. And that's where I don't like it when people start playing the black and white in politics. Will you oppose capital punishment for child rapists? Does that mean you support child rapists? No, not for a second, not even slightly. I just don't trust the government to have the power to kill citizens. That's the problem. This is a government that's completely incompetent. This is a government that is corrupted. This is a government that locked us down for a virus. They seized our bank accounts. They raided churches. They shut down restaurants. Do you really want them to have the ability to kill citizens? And people say, oh, we'll only use it in cases where it's 100% known for sure. We never know 100%, guys. Anything can be faked. There was a piece I saw a while back on a laboratory. I believe it was up in the New England area, but it turned out it was underfunded and terribly. It was a forensic laboratory. And it turns out the person running it was just a basket case, and they had all sorts of screw-ups with genetic samplings and DNA things that people went to jail based on the wrong outcomes of that lab. Because people are saying with DNA, we know for sure that this person killed that person or this person raped that person. No, we don't actually. No, we don't. I believe in life sentences. I'd like to see child rapists put on a bus, put to a prison somewhere deep in the territories up there where the door will be welded shut and they will die up there of a ripe old age. I'm perfectly fine with that. But I do not want to see the government having the ability to irreversibly do something such as execute somebody. It's just too much to entrust a government that can't even get its own payroll system right. And again, in Florida, they're talking about, the death penalty for people who do this on children under 12. And remember, there have been people falsely convicted of those sorts of things. There have been cases where people falsely accuse people of those awful, awful crimes. And it's not found out until later. And at least it's still better that you can somewhat rectify it later than if, what are you going to do? Chisel something new on the gravestone. Oh, sorry about that. We got new evidence. I guess you weren't guilty about that. We've given your descendants some money in a lawsuit on it. We'll try and do better next time. Either way, I sometimes, there's complicated problems. capital punishment is kind of a simple solution to it. And the point of justice systems should be prevention, sometimes reform. You can't reform those child molesters. I agree with that. Keep them in for good. But we should never set it up for vengeance, no matter how hard we feel it may be appropriate or how little we think of those people being convicted under it, who often, again, I'm not talking about nice people, but don't jump out and say, oh, he must feel soft on child molesters. Of course not. It's just that sometimes the cure is worse than the disease. All right, let's check in. We haven't talked to him in a while with Jim Boozicum from Marketplace Commodities. We're going to pivot a little, something a little less intense than the justice issue south of the border, but very important, and that's our agriculture commodities. Hey, Jim, how you doing?
Hey, great, Cory. How are you today?
Very good, very good. It's been crazy times with the election, but overall pretty good.
Good. All right.
So, yeah, we got a lot to cover. It's been a while, and it sounds like there's some big international issues kind of affecting markets right now.
Yeah, we'll start there. The biggest issue is geopolitics. Russia and Ukraine continues to, I wouldn't hardly call it trudging along, but it's a serious issue. So to your listeners, I thought I'd just run through that real quick. 6% of the world exports of wheat come from Ukraine. 25% come from Russia. So the UN is brokering a grain corridor out of Ukraine, which is important. But more importantly, if the war moves from Ukraine soil to perhaps Russian soil, as we've seen last night, there's a drone attack in Russian soil, it would have a larger impact on the grain markets. Right now, Russia continues to ship. They ship to really most countries around the world, whether we like it or not. They're big sellers into Southeast Asia, into China, and Canadian grain has to compete with that. So we'll have to see how some of those things develop, but I'd say it's something, it's important that we keep our eye on that for sure.
All right, then outside markets, you'd sent some other stuff on that. I mean, these things impact, of course, the domestic things as well, and need to be watched, such as the crude oil markets these days.
Yeah, it's always important as a producer, as a farmer, to pay attention to more than just what your local commodities are selling at, because you look at crude oil, it's been in a free fall for a few days. It's actually dropped below $70 a barrel this morning. And actually another one that I find of interest is sugar. And I'll explain the reason why. Sugar's actually been on the upswing. It's corrected over the last few days, but it's actually quite strong. So we would look at energy markets as sort of your industrial energy and sugar as sort of your food energy. So between the two of them, they will have impact on the crops that you're growing. We tend to think of the food or the crops that we grow on the prairies as typically just food or maybe feedstock that we grow. Well, they're actually energy stock as well. If you look at the ethanol industry, the biofuels industry, a lot of the commodities that you're growing do end up as an energy product somewhere along the line. So keep an eye on those outside markets as well.
Well, there's a lot to track, and that's where you guys specialize. So where can people find more information about your organization?
You've got it listed right there. We're always available. Marketplace Commodities, give us a call at the office. We have a team of dedicated traders that are looking to help you market your grain. We are buying and selling grain across Western Canada, across Alberta and Saskatchewan specifically. It's where most of the volume comes, and we'd be happy to hear from you.
Great. Well, good to check in with you again, Jim, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Cory. Take care.
Great. Thank you. Okay, guys, that kind of runs up our time today. There's so many issues and not enough time. So again, that reminder, if you haven't subscribed to the Western Standard yet, get on there, guys. westernstandard.news/membership. Take one out. It's well worth it. Helps support us. It gets you past that pesky paywall so you can see all of that stuff, articles and columns without any of that hindrance. I will be back again next week, guys, at this time. Thank you for tuning in, and we will talk again then.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny.